Hi everybody, my name is Travis, Pagan Scholar, and this is my first episode for the YouTube Pagan Challenge of 2018. This year they're doing the ABCs of Paganism. This year the challenge is alphabetical, that each video is going to be a topic within paganism that is addressed by the letter A, B, C, D, etc. And so I thought this was a really fun and interesting way to move about and navigate paganism. So yeah, let's get started. A is for anthropomorphism. That's right. Anthropomorphism is a philosophical concept that we ascribe human traits and behaviors onto inhuman things. I think that this is hella relevant in contemporary paganism because we do this a lot. But before I jump all the way into contemporary paganism, I want to bring it all the way back to the ancients, to the pre-Socratic philosophers, Xenophonus. And you're right if you think I'm going to put that guy in my back pocket when X comes along of topics to talk about in contemporary paganism. Xenophonus was a pre-Socratic philosopher, 574? 540, he was born 570, and he kind of is the first, there is dialogue about him as being one of the first ancient pre-Socratic philosophers to push towards a monotheism. He was a poet and a philosopher, and he concerned himself primarily with the nature of the gods, and he criticized Homer and the theogony with ascribing the different gods as having the faults and the faulty traits of humanity. Homer and Hesiod have ascribed to the gods all deeds which among men are a reproach and a disgrace, thievery, adultery, and deceiving one another. We are all, or at least in the West, are very familiar with the Olympian mythology and how, I mean, it's almost a joke at this point, you know, how Zeus is just basically a walking PR nightmare. So that was the first kind of reproach, the first critique of this anthropomorphizing idea that God is something that is very, very human. There are a couple of fine-tuning things that we need to do before we get into that. So to make it relate directly to anthropomorphism and why Xenophonus thinks that that is not a very accurate, or the flaws of anthropomorphism is in, yes, so this is actually one of my favorite fragments. If oxen and horses and lions had hands, and were able to draw with their hands and do the same things as men, horses would draw the shapes of gods to look like horses, and oxen to look like oxen, and each would make the gods' bodies have the same shape as they themselves had. So this is almost a kind of humanistic approach to anthropomorphism, in that humans are maybe not selfish. Well, of course humans are selfish, but humans have a tendency to find patterns. We are pattern makers, we are meaning makers, and in finding these patterns and in pondering deity and pondering the great mysteries of what is beyond us that we cannot know, we tend to think like, well, if I can't know it, what it is, maybe it's like me, maybe it has a human attitude, or I can attribute a human skill or quality, emotion, element to this idea of deity. We find this in other ideas as well, with animism. I am not an animist, so I don't know the ins and outs of the proper animism with a capital A. We find that human qualities are still present in animal spirits, or not even in spirits, but in just our pets. We do describe our pets as being hopeful. I can't remember, I'm blanking right now, I'll put the link in the description below, but there was a conference that the speaker talked about anthropomorphism, and how it can be kind of dangerous, but how it's also still permitted. Like, we can still describe our animals as having a human quality, as having a human trait, like hopefulness, as in the dog can hope for a treat. But can the dog hope for next Thursday it will get to go to the park? Like, that's a very complicated and nuanced form of hope, and we don't typically give dogs that much credit, you know, so we don't give animals that much credit. If you do give your animals the nuance of, you know, will I get my heartworm medication next February, that's kind of it starts to tread waters in a more dangerous area of anthropomorphism and why it can be critiqued. How can anthropomorphism be dangerous? Well, if we go to Hegel, Hegel was the one of the people who really fought for this idea of a world spirit, of a consciousness of the world. I've touched on this in my video about aesthetics, not about Hegel specifically, but about the idea of a zeitgeist and a genius loci, and how aesthetics is the intersection between the two. But going back to Hegel, Hegel was a proponent of this world spirit and how every single nation in the world had a national spirit, and each nation had its own epoch where they would rise to power, and the spirit of the nation, of the time and the place, would rise to power. And who did Hegel influence? The Nazis. There was a really dangerous rhetoric going on that Germany was the nation had an anthropomorphized spirit. I mean, like, you know, you can go one way or the other, whether people believed it was a physical manifest spirit or just a metaphorical understanding of the word. But when we invest so much attention and energy into a metaphor that anthropomorphizes a nation, we can really justify a lot of really dangerous and terrible actions. Basically, anthropomorphism can be harmless in that, you know, my dog is hopeful that she will be fed tonight, and it can be dangerous in that, you know, the fatherland will rise to power and conquer all enemies who stand in its way. Like, that jingoistic rhetoric is really, really bad. Speaking of Germany, Nietzsche actually weighs in on anthropomorphism as well in a very linguistic kind of way. Please, I'm really rusty with my Nietzsche. I haven't read Nietzsche in a good while, actually, but that's what the internet's for, and I've got my trusty computer right here. So Nietzsche has weighed in on this in an essay called On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense. This can be a little bit problematic because it was published by his sister, and his sister kind of twisted a lot of his words to fit Nazi propaganda. We have since been able to go back and read his original documents after the vaults were opened, but it kind of screwed up a lot of Nietzschean philosophy. However, regardless, so in this essay, Nietzsche explores the concepts of what is truth and how do we arrive at truth, and some really interesting linguistic things come out of this. So we have abstractions, we have this idea that we have metaphors actually are the primary root of truth in language, and we speak in metaphor, and we have become so comfortable with metaphor that we no longer see it as metaphor. I actually had a professor back in college who made the distinction between living and dead metaphors. As a person who's interested in poetry, I really latched onto this. A living metaphor is something that actually makes you kind of think about it first. It's like, oh wow, that's really catchy, that's poetic, you know, and poetry is the marketplace of all metaphor. But a dead metaphor would be something that no longer triggers any sort of creative thought or interpretation. It's just taken as like a standard saying. It's no longer a poetic saying, it's just a saying. In this Nietzschean idea, we've ingrained ourselves with metaphors so much that they are like coins passed between us, where the surface of the coin has been worn off and we no longer recognize it as a specific coin with a beautiful engraving on it. It's just a piece of metal that we use to ease transactions of conversation, of understanding one another, a sort of linguistic ease of communication. When we go back to the ideas that metaphors are sort of the progenitors of truth and meaning, we have ingrained ourselves in meanings of metaphors that we no longer consider to be poetic or that no longer trigger that charm in us. And the abstract, the anthropomorphized world has, it's become a thing of pure construct. Like when you start to describe the universe in terms of math, like that's a product of metaphor actually, because it's no longer living and dwelling in the present world. It's completely abstracted from us. One beautiful, absolutely amazing quote because I do not have this essay on my bookshelf. Nietzsche argues that truth is actually a mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, and anthropomorphisms, in short, a sum of human relation which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which after long use seem firm, canonical, and obligatory to a people. Truths are illusions about which one has forgotten that this is what they are. Metaphors which are worn out and without sinuous power, coins which have lost their pictures and now matter only as metal, no longer as coins. When we talk about anthropomorphism, whenever we ascribe human qualities onto a rock, onto a plant, onto an animal, we are constructing a reality. We are constructing and positing a virtue of metaphysics, a condition of the metaphysical paradigm that we inhabit, that we use to explain and navigate the world and interpret the world. And I think as pagans, we really need to pay attention to what we are anthropomorphizing and what we are ascribing a quality. So whenever we talk about a tarot deck having a quality of, like, this tarot deck is really good for readings about careers, then that's just describing a tarot deck. That's just something that is incidental, and it really works well with that. This tarot deck doesn't want to be taken lightly, where this tarot deck only wants to be used for serious readings about careers. This tarot deck resists interpretation because it's a very serious and somber tarot deck. All of these things are ascribing a human trait, a human quality, a human condition onto a tarot deck. And you might get called out on that. You, in a conversation with other paradigms, with other beliefs, whenever we ascribe a human quality to a god or to an object or to an animal, we have to be able to say, why we're saying that, and from where we have drawn this information to be able to say, this is an anthropomorphism of deity, in that my god is I'm going back to Abraham, but it's like, my God is a vengeful God, my God is a jealous God. Well, whenever we say, oh, my God doesn't like me dealing with this, or doesn't think I should be doing this, we are anthropomorphizing deity. And that's a really big thing in the theological community. It is something to be considered and at least aware of, mindful of, whenever we make statements and assertions about our religious beliefs and about our connection with God and how we understand and navigate the universe. That was all just like, bam, here's a bunch of words, but that was my foray into the ABCs of paganism for the YouTube Pagan Challenge of 2018. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have a more perfect understanding of Nietzsche or Xenophonus, please correct me. I'm very rusty with some of my philosophy, and I need that education, guys. I miss it. I miss philosophy so much. A like is appreciated, a subscription even more so, and as always, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.